Hello everyone. In the previous video, we just created our buff, which will be used to manage the terminal UI. Let's get started by implementing the event begin play. In there, we are going to use a small delay, followed by switchnet authority. We want to create a widget on the client side or for the player server. To do so, we are going to use create widget. But for that, we need to create our widget first. So let's do that. When you create a new widget, make sure to change the parent class from user widget to the primal UI. You need to do that or you will end up with crashing your DevKit as well as the game. And now, since we have our widget, we go back to the buff and reference it inside the create widget node. And we need to get the player controller. We can do that by using the instigator. Once we create a widget, we need to add it to the viewpoint, set the keyboard focus on it, and the last thing is to set the input to UI only. This will prevent the player from moving and controlling their character when they press keys or move the mouse inside the UI. For the widget, we'll do a basic setup. So add a border, make it fill up the screen, change the color to a dark transparent one, add another border, set it to 50 pixels margin on all sides, wrap it with a size box, set the size to 9020 with 1080, and now wrap this with a scale box. This will make sure that our main content is always in the same proportions regardless of the user's screen size. Now let's set the background. We are going to use the same as the core game is using. Change to box and set the margin to 0.33 and add one more border. This will be our main background. Search for the animated background and set the size to fit our border. Now let's add a horizontal box. We're going to add an image and add a vertical box. We will later stream the video feed from the drone to this image. And inside there, add a scroll box. Later on, we will list our drones inside the scroll box. and we are going to add a button on top of the preview image. To do that, let's wrap the image with the overlay. And I used here a horizontal box so I can center the button. And I want the button by default to be disabled. With that, the basic setup is done. Now let's move on to creating a list of drones. Let's rename our scroll box and set to be a variable. The first thing we need is a variable in which we are going to store a list of drones. And as the type of that variable, we are going to create our own structure. Right-click, Blueprints, and choose Structure. For now, we'll add there an ID, a name, and the status of the drone, which is the current HP. So now let's pick our structure as the variable type and make it a list. Now let's create a new function and call it Populate SpyDrone list. First, we make sure that our scroll box is empty by clearing out the children. Then we are going to use a for each loop to loop through all the spy drones we have and create a widget for each drone and add it to the spy drone list. But before we can do this, we need to create a widget which will represent a spy drone. Since this will be a child widget, we don't need to make it as a primal UI. So leave here the user widget as a parent. Make the root element a button. Add inside a few text blocks to show the data of the drone. Don't forget to set is variable for all the text blocks, as we need to access them inside the graph. Make it look a little bit nicer. I'm going to keep it as simple as possible. Now let's implement the constructor. Let's add a new variable which will represent the spy drone. And make sure you have expose on spawn checked. And now let's just break the information from inside the spy drone and feed to the text blocks. Once finished, let's move back to our main widget, reference our SpyDrone widget, and feed the SpyDrone from the for each loop, set the owning player, and add it to our scroll box. Now let's implement the construct for our main widget. And the first thing we are going to do here is to get a reference to our buff. We're going to check if the player has the buff. If not, we are going to remove the widget instantly. And if the player has the buff, we need to ask it for a list of the SpyDrones. To do that, let's first go back to our buff. In here, we are going to create a new custom event. We will set it to run on server. And there we are going to use get all actors of class and set the actor class to our SpyDrone. We are running this on the server because whenever you scan for actors, make sure you are doing that on the server side if you want to get all the actors, because on the client only the actors who are in the render range will be returned. So anything far away from the player is not existing. And now we are going to use a for each again, loop through all the actors, cast them to our SpyDrone, and make a SpyDrone structure item, which we are going to add to the list. Now let's create a new variable. In it, we will store all the found drones belonging to this player. We need to check if the owning player ID of the drone matches our player ID. Also, let's make sure that our SpyDrone list is empty, so we don't add on each scan the same drone to the list again and again. So with this, we made sure it's an empty array. We are going to use this ID in a future tutorial where a terminal will have multiple drones and not just this one. And now we have a list of the drones, but the list is currently only existing on the server, but we need it on the client to list it inside the widget. For that, we are going to create one more custom event, but this time set it as run on client. And as an input, it will take a list of SpyDrone items. And we are going to call this event at the end of the for each inside the run on server and send it the just created list. Notice that our SpyDrone list is not set to replicate because we are doing that manually with our run on server and run on client custom events. With this, we have a full control of when the list will be sent from the server to the client and when do we want to refresh the list on the server side. So inside the run on client, we are just going to set the list again with the values coming from the input. So understand that this list exists on the server and on the client. So the run on server created the list server side. On the client, it's still empty. Nothing exists there. With the run on client, we are saying whatever you got on the server, set it to be also on the client. So now both lists have the same value inside. And one last thing is we are going to create an event dispatcher which will notify anyone who subscribed to it that the list was updated on the client and that they need to execute some logic to handle this new information. In our case, recreate the list of drones inside the widget. So back in our widget, let's create a new variable in which we will store the buff reference we got. And right here, we are going to subscribe to the drone list change. For that, we are going to use the create event node, feed it self, so the widget, and choose a function which has the same inputs as the event dispatcher. In our case, no inputs at all. And that would be our populate SpyDrone list. And right after that, we are going to tell the buff to scan for new drones. And we could now just copy the list from the buff to our widget. But let's make this a little bit simpler and just use the list directly from the buff. Let's also add an event dispatcher on our drone widget, which will notify us if someone clicked on it. And this event dispatcher will have an input, which will be the ID of the drone, so that we know which drone was clicked. Later, when we have multiple drones, that will be useful. For now, it's just a placeholder. And inside our main widget, we are going to subscribe to the button click. And for now, we are just going to print out the ID sent by the event dispatcher. For that, we need to create a new function which has the same input as the event dispatcher. In this case, one variable of type string. The name of the inputs doesn't have to match, but the types and order have to. And just like a moment ago, we are going to use create event, feed itself, and then select the function which has the same inputs as the event dispatcher. One more thing which is smart to do is implement the removed from viewpoint function on our main widget. And inside there, we are going to check if the buff reference is valid. And if so, we want to get rid of the buff. And I made here an issue calling destroy actor on the client side inside the widget, which won't work on dedicated servers. So we will need to fix that later. So now let's add a few print strings to see if everything is working correctly. And one really important thing I missed is we need to set the owning player ID on the drone, since spawn from Dino data only sets the team ID but not the specific player ID. And now let's test this. And before we finish with this part of the tutorial, let's just fix the HP. We need to multiply it by 100 to show it as from 0 to 100% and not from 0 to 1. With that, we are done with this part of the tutorial. See you in the next one, and probably the last one for the SpyDrone.